Hey, welcome everyone. It's January 23rd. I like to put that in to make Martin happy that we have a date because I seem to always forget to say when we record these, but it is January 23rd. Wow. A month has already gone in 2024 and I don't know where the time flies. We're having so much fun. I think I am. This year has been a lot of fun. I get to talk to these guys. They were just in Germany last week, so for work. And how was Germany? How was Munich?
Cold.
It was
It was
cold.
snowing. It was cold. It was freezing, and yeah, we've been at work, so not too much time to hang out outside of the office.
Yeah. Did they have rail? Was the rail system going?
Sorta.
Sort of.
You had to hop on a
Let's not go
bus.
there.
Yeah, it was strange, but at least they have a train system, which was kind of nice.
Yeah, that's true. We don't really have unless you're in big cities. So here in the United States.
Yeah, I like to get around the U.S. hitchhiking. So if you see me on the side of the road, just pick me up. It'll be fun.
Yeah. You live back in the 60s.
Yeah, it'll be fun.
I don't know with that haircut. I don't know if I would pick you up, man. You look like you just broke out of a maximum security prison with that haircut.
Look, I said Jason Statham gave me a call and said, "Hey, Khalid, I need you for the next Jason Statham vehicle. Okay, you're gonna have to shave your head. It's gonna be great." So, Beekeeper, look out for the sequel, Seakeeper. So, it's gonna be great.
Awesome. That joke didn't get any better from before you said it before the show. But
I'm really happy we're now repeating those puns.
Yes,
come on,
yes. So,
all right.
Well, we're here. So we've lost a little focus in the show, but we're going to get the focus back because that's what we're going to talk about today. Is the last episode we talked about getting new skills and improving your skills, but how do we use those skills effectively, like focus and get our work done? I don't know if I'm the best person to ask, but I'll give my ideas on how I've done it for the last almost 30 years. But yeah, so focus. I think it's a big problem, especially today in the world of social media and short attention spans. And we're like things that we're watching are really like no one watches movies anymore. They watch like 4-minute TikTok videos, maybe not even that, maybe a minute. I think everything is short attention span, but how do we build that attention span back up so we can concentrate for a considerable amount of time? Ideas.
Yeah, it's funny. I'm probably not the best person to ask either because, there is a lot of things vying for your attention. And the thing I've always heard that is good, and I always try to get into it, is like taking notes and having checklists. But I don't know. What do you folks think? Like, I've never been able to effectively transplant my brain into a set of notes or to-do lists. So they kind of always, I start with good intentions and never kind of complete it. The closest thing I've had to a good checklist is maybe putting things on a calendar and kind of knowing things are there. But that also, like, having calendar dates also makes me a little anxious at times. So I try to keep that down to a minimum. So are you folks big note takers / to-do listers?
Well, let's find out what the machine does. What the machine thinks.
I will say I'm not a note taker. I do try to write down a couple of the tasks that I want to accomplish at some points, but they all kind of go in a backlog. I also have one downside in my brain, and that is that I am quite good at remembering things. So my wife always tells me, like, look, you know where we were at that point in time, what we were eating, what I was wearing, and all of that stuff, which I think is also mental ballast. I also know a lot of European pop songs by heart, which is also probably not something I want to remember, but it is what it is, right? But what I do find helpful is that the bigger ideas or the things that you really want to do, it's better to write them down at some point, because writing them down does give you this thing of it's out of my brain, first of all, but second of all, it gives you the ability to reason from a little bit more distance and think about whether you actually want to do that thing or not. So that's a first step that definitely helps as well.
Yep.
So you do think writing things down is a good idea, right? So in that vein, like, where do you write things down? Is it in a notepad? Do you keep like a file? Do you use a tool maybe?
It's all over the place. I have actual notepad.exe on my Windows machine where I take notes and save them. I have our internal issue tracker where I try to keep track of a number of things that I want to accomplish at some point. It's more about filling the backlog. Whereas Notepad for me is more like, okay, these are the pressing things that I want to get done at some point.
Okay, cool. Chris, what do you do?
Oh, that's good. That is the big question. So I keep a to-do list on paper. I've tried different apps. So I've tried OneNote. I'm trying Notion right now, which the problem is it just takes so much energy to start this stuff. But to be honest, things that I need permanent, I just put into a hard like book. So I don't lose paper and stuff. So yeah, it's always been tough for me to keep everything because I think the problem that a lot of us have is habits. We fall back on our old habits. I'm not saying they're bad. I'm not saying they're good. It's just habits that we've always used. And I think focus is a lot about building new habits and everything. But yeah, I write stuff down. I used to carry, and I'm thinking about this again, carrying a voice recorder that I could just, because sometimes I'll be out or I'll be in meetings or walking down a hall or where I can't really write things, and I would use the voice recorder to say, hey, remember to email Rob tomorrow or tonight about this, and this. But I think a lot of it is taking good notes so you don't forget what you talked about at meetings. It's really, I mean, I think everyone's different. Martin has probably a much better memory than I do. I mean, he's younger. Older people like me, our memories seem to kind of get a little harder to remember things. So I've had to fall back on writing a lot of stuff down and putting stuff in. But I've learned that you can only use one thing to collect your ideas. Like you can't collect some of it on paper and some of it in apps and some of it in a book. It really needs to be put into one place, one place of total authority that you can go back to. So that's kind of my thinking.
Yeah, I've been using a note-taking app that kind of uses markdown files. It's called Obsidian. Folks, check that out. It's pretty neat, but it lets you kind of write these referencing documents, and it can help you kind of create a mind map. I use it in the worst possible way. I just use it as like a dumping place of like notes and blog posts and things like that. But from seeing people who actually take the time to invest and learn it, like you said, even with Notion, it is really impressive. And there's like, it's mostly free, but there's like a service attached to it. So Obsidian's pretty cool. I definitely recommend folks check it out, at least for note taking and stuff like that. So yeah.
Yeah.
So
I mean, my big question is this is where I think AI can really, really, really help us,
Mm-hmm.
is to be that, I'll say, assistant, to really be that artificial assistant that we all need. Like, it would be great if we were in a Zoom meeting and you had this little AI thing listening to the meeting and
Mm-hmm.
going and creating those notes and creating the to-dos,
Mm-hmm.
and then build it, like taking everything that it heard, and then, because you can do that now, you can say, hey, here's a chapter of this book, take this chapter and give me a synopsis of this chapter.
Mm-hmm.
And the AI super brains or generative AI machines will do a pretty good job of building that. But that maybe I just thought of my $1 billion how to be a billionaire. But I think if you had that and had the ability to have something besides you to say, hey, like, I just heard this might be important, put in the thing and remind you at the end of the day, like have some kind of email that went out at the end of the day or the next morning and said, this is everything that I kind of gathered from your dealings over the last 24 hours.
I mean, I think it's a good idea, but it kind of brings up the next question about staying focused, right? So we've talked about potentially taking notes, where you put those. I think the next question for me really is thinking about, once you have a list of tasks, right? How do you folks go about like prioritizing and setting yourself up for success, right? Because part of note taking isn't just that you have notes, right? If you just have notes and you never take any action, then you just, you know, you seem like a maniac.
Yeah.
It's like, so at some point you have to look at those notes, prioritize, and move forward. So how do you folks kind of go about that?
Good question. I was actually going to ask the same thing because you indeed have the note taking, but then you also have the doing.
Mm-hmm.
One additional question on top of that, if you want to touch on that as well, is that if you have this big list of to-do items and you punch off some things, but then other things keep they remain on the to-do lists. How do you prevent the to-do list from overwhelming you and essentially freezing because there's so much on your plate and so many things that you feel that you should be doing?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That is a good question. I
Yeah.
mean, if you're constantly filling up your plate but nothing's coming off of it, I think it can feel very overwhelming. But I know I asked my question first too, so
Yeah.
you
So
finish.
Martin, I mean, how do you get stuff off of your to-do list? I mean, that's the big thing is how do you focus to get things off, and how do you prioritize them? Yeah.
I think Khalid can attest to this one. So in our team, I try to do the same thing, and that is pruning of the backlog. Like if something is on there for a couple of weeks or even a couple of months or a couple of years in some cases, either you agree that this is going to happen and you keep it on, or you say, okay, I've not touched this thing for a year and a half. Let's maybe remove it so I have some additional mental bandwidth to focus on the next thing.
Yeah. I think
Yeah.
that's, you just have, I think at some point you have to be honest with yourself and go, yeah, I want to write that blog post, but I haven't had the energy or the kind of the excitement to write it. So maybe I don't actually want to write it. Maybe it's something like that I'm just going to forget about. And if it pops up in a year, I'll write it then.
Hmm. Yeah, I think that's a good point. I think I don't know. I was gonna say I think most humans operate this way, but maybe not. Maybe I'm weirdo, but uh, uh, I feel at times that I can get a list of tasks together, but my energy level definitely ebbs and flows. And I think the word backlog has been used a lot during this episode. So there are days where I can knock 4 things off of a list, and then other days I might get 1 thing off the list. So I think part of focus is also recognizing in yourself that you're going to have those ebbs and flows in energy and focus, and you should kind of be kind to yourself and understand some days you're going to be really productive, get a lot done, and other days you're just going to need that time to kind of either recuperate or maybe take a different approach to working through a problem, right? So some days you're doing and some days you're thinking about things. And in our technology field, it's okay to spend a day thinking about how you may or may not tackle a particular task, right? So in your case, Chris, you mentioned that blog post. Instead of maybe just abandoning the idea completely, maybe it makes sense to think about that blog post and turning it into, say, like a graphic or a tweet that starts a conversation online, or even just a small conversation with somebody to talk about the idea so that maybe it can birth new ideas, right?
Yeah.
So uh, don't just I would say just don't abandon ideas right away. Maybe that idea is still a good idea, but the way you're thinking about tackling it is maybe not the right
Well,
medium.
I think you hit on something, and all this discussion is about us alone, just us.
Hmm.
And sometimes you need that outside uh, feedback.
Hmm.
And I don't really do this that much. Um, but I wish I did ask people a little bit more like, hey, I've got this idea about X,
Hmm.
which Khalid, I do have an idea about something that I need your feedback on at some point,
Yep.
because you just made me realize is we can't do this alone.
Hmm.
Um, we are social animals, and sometimes we need other people to say, hey, that's a good idea. Yeah, that's not a good idea. Maybe that's not a great thing to do with your time. Um,
Hmm.
but I think when you're at work, so I'm going to bring work into this. When you're at work and you have stuff that you personally want to do, you got to talk to your team and get some feedback. It's kind of like paired programming, but paired thinking,
Hmm.
and go, hey, I've got these ideas. What do you think about these? Because I want to bring them up at the next requirement meeting or feature discussion or whatever. So not only do you have to think about everything in here, but I think you have to have that external feedback is really important.
Hmm.
There's a number of things there. So kind of linking everything together, there's a book that I read a long time ago. I don't even remember when, by J.D. Meyer from Microsoft, and it's called Getting Results. And it's his formal workflow of actually planning your week and so on. And I believe he starts with, okay, on Monday you do your planning and you try and decide on 3 things that you want to accomplish that week. And you also give them priorities where you say, okay, this thing has to be done no matter what. This thing would be really nice if it's done. And then there's the optional things that you may want to achieve as well. And I find I'm not using the complete workflow from that book, but I do find that having that list of things based ranked by priority essentially gives you the ability to focus on whatever you want to focus on that week. but also helps with maintaining those energy levels. Like if you
Yeah.
have one thing that you must do, you have 5 days in the week. If on Monday you don't have the energy for that, maybe on Wednesday you will. So on Wednesday morning, you can still say, okay, my must, that's the thing I'm going to tackle today. And I
Yeah.
think, like you say, Chris, getting feedback from external people on Twitter or X or from your team or whatever is super important to maybe help you identify what those must be done and could be done and should be done items are.
Yeah. So I too had I read a book. This has been maybe almost 20 years ago. It was called Mission Control, and it was this whole dynamic. You remember Getting Things Done? Can't remember the author.
Yeah.
But that's a great framework for getting things done. This was called Mission Control. And the one thing that I gleaned out of that I still try to use today is when I create a meeting with someone, in the subject of the meeting, I say the purpose of the meeting, like discuss with Martin how to solve X, or discuss this problem with Khalid. And one, it makes you focus on just that, because if you just go in having, meeting with Khalid, like it's so open-ended. But if you have the purpose for the title of the meeting, it also conveys purpose to the other person that's coming into that meeting, that's what you want to resolve. And it really comes down to, if your meeting doesn't have a purpose, don't have a meeting, because there's no focus.
Yeah,
for that
for
meeting.
sure. You know what's interesting? Like, I have two thoughts. When we talk about teams and team members, the enemy of focus to me has always been, especially in a team environment, has been obsession, right? You can kind of confuse obsession and going down a rabbit hole for being focused. I've seen this happen to a lot of team members where they kind of forget what the goal was to begin with, because they're so intensely obsessed with solving a particular problem that they end up going down a rabbit hole and actually wasting more time and feeling stressed that they're not getting their tasks accomplished. So to your point, Chris, I think it's important to keep a connection with someone who maybe can give you a different perspective, so you don't rabbit hole yourself to the point where you're actually being less productive and less focused than if you had someone else there. Because I think a lot of times people confuse like pair programming with a lack of focus, and I think that's not really been my experience.
Yeah.
When it comes to meetings, I did see an interesting interview with like Jeff Bezos about how Amazon does meetings. They understand that people are busy, and what they do is they dedicate the first 15 minutes of every meeting to reading a document about what their focus should be in that meeting, which I found really fascinating. So someone will put this meeting together, but they'll write a document, and then everyone comes to the meeting and they're given 10 to 15 minutes at the beginning of meeting just to sit there silently and read the document and the tasks ahead of them. I've never had a meeting like that, but it seems interesting. I'd like to experience a meeting like that. What do you folks think about hearing a meeting set up like that? Do you think it sounds weird, or do you think it makes sense?
All right. So in our next podcast recording, we are going to have 15 minutes of silence while we read what we're going to talk about and then jump
Yes.
in.
Oh man, this is going to be great.
Yeah, and this goes in, so we'll foreshadow the next episode, which is going to be how to work with teams and work with others.
Yeah.
So I think this also, your question falls kind of into that also, is how do you work as a team to stay focused in meetings, and so maybe we'll pick this up also. But I like the idea. I like anything that can keep people focused. I don't know if it should be 15 minutes, but a certain amount of time should go in and say, these are the key points that we are trying to solve. Like, that's why I like having 15-minute stand-ups for teams, or 20-minute, depending on the size of the team, because everyone knows they're just going around and saying what they're getting done, how it's going, and what they need help with. And then it goes on to the next person, and it's really focused. And that's the thing. But it still comes down to short attention span. Oh, my problem is, my big question is, how do we get, maybe you guys have longer attention spans. Like, I remember when I was in my 20s and early 30s, I literally would sit down to code, and I would like come back to reality. Say I started coding at 7, and literally I could go till like 2 a.m. and I'd be like, oh, where did all the time go? And now it's like 7 minutes later, I'm like, oh, squirrel. Like, so
that really seems to, yeah, I think
Yeah.
that really depends on the task you're in. For example, coding, I still have that where I can lose myself in code for 1-2 hours at a time without any issue. But when I'm, for example, working on preparing a presentation where you have some demo that you want to prep, some slides and so on, I find myself browsing X and all kinds of really crazy websites all the time, because it kind of feels like my brain needs it at that point to stay open, to stay focused on the task at hand, even though all of the randomness that is there kind of contradicts that. And I love, for example, when in our internal Slack at JetBrains, so Khalid and I work together, I do like when Khalid starts posting Photoshops, for example, because I know part of his creative process of getting things done is also Photoshopping, just to keep his mind open. So I usually know when I see a lot of Photoshops coming by, I know he's working on 2 blog posts at the same time, and they'll be ready in a couple of hours, which is interesting to see.
Am I that predictable? I did think of a task to put on your list though, Martin. Erase your browser history. I'll do that for you if it needs to be, because you're browsing all those crazy sites.
Yeah. So is well, that brings up, has anyone use, or do they use these apps that you run on your computers that will like turn off access to certain websites, not like illicit, but just like, for me, I would love to not go out to like discussion groups that have nothing to do with what I'm working on. Like, it will literally turn off like personal email, and it'll turn off like Slack, other than like your work Slack and stuff like that. And sometimes you can have it turn off everything, and just so you can focus and not have those interruptions from work also. But because we're so, I think, being in front of a computer, we have so many different windows, like trying to get our attention.
Yeah. I will say Mac OS is very good about first class features, and I typically have do not disturb turned on. I don't see a lot of notifications. I don't remember it being as bad, but given the decade that we're in, I feel like everyone is trying to maximize engagement. So there's constant notifications vying for your attention. I think it's gotten a little crazy. I mean, Windows is a good is a good use case of like how it tries so hard to just get your attention about everything. So with Mac OS, I feel like there's a little bit of sanity there. Linux is a lot better, so I definitely recommend those operating systems.
Windows is doing okay. I mean, you can you can have do not disturb now, where it will turn off all notifications.
Yeah, I mean, rant, I think Windows has a lot of like weird pop-ups. Like when you open the start menu, there's like news articles that you didn't ask for, and the Bing icon
Oh,
is constantly
well,
changing in the
yeah,
toolbar. And
yeah. I
yeah,
turn all that
But
stuff off.
yeah,
yeah.
there's also Chris. To your point, I've tried those tools as well in the past, and I found that they do not work because you are still the person controlling the app, so you know how to shut it down or shut it off, and still go around. And I have the same thing on my phone, for example. For a while, I thought, okay, let's limit myself to 10 minutes of social media per day. But I found myself when the timer went up and said, hey, you exceeded 10 minutes, I would just go into the settings and expand it to 20 minutes.
Yeah.
So I think
should
for
the
those apps to
AI
work, yeah.
So should the AI overlord have total control over that? Like, don't let me AI
You know,
assistant. Don't
what's
let
funny
me
though, Chris?
turn you off.
When you said that idea, that I had a thought in my head, and I think the dystopian future thought in me says like, sure, these AIs will summarize your meeting and give you task items, but one of those task items is like, make sure you buy a new iPhone, or like make sure you upgrade to Windows 31. Like, what keeps corporations from injecting weird tasks that are like,
True.
yeah, it's strange. But
True.
no, to
It
Martin's
doesn't matter
point,
as long as they stay in the backlog, right?
yeah, I guess so. But yeah, to Martin's point, I think the flip side of focus is discipline, right? Like, how do you grow your discipline in a particular way? I think for me has always been, if you intrinsically want something, like it's in you and you really want it, I think you'll put the effort into doing that thing. So it's like whether you want to complete a task, whether you want to get in shape, whether you want to learn a language, it's got to start from a place of like you wanting to do that thing, right? Um if you don't really want to do it, and it's okay if you don't really want to do it, I think it's going to be harder to focus and get those tasks complete. Like yesterday I was procrastinating putting an issue in our issue tracker because I'm like, I know it'd take me 2 minutes, but I was like, oh man, I could care less.
Yeah,
Right?
that's true. So one thing that I've over the last year, I've tried to build up this longer attention span.
Yeah.
And what has helped me is reading. And reading for like a half an hour to an hour every night gets my brain in a building a habit that it doesn't go off in all these tangents constantly. I'm just reading, and it doesn't matter what I'm reading. It could be just I'm reading the Foundation series in not in the order of the books coming out, but actually in the chronological order of the content of the books.
Huh.
And it's actually pretty good because I haven't read Foundation in probably over 30 years. So I forgot most of it. But reading half an hour to an hour every night makes my brain have the ability to focus for a longer period of time on other things also. So it comes back to I'm building that habit in my brain. I'm trying to break this short-term bursts of information, and
Mhm.
so trying to get back to like even watching a movie. Like how many people like get distracted halfway through a movie?
I mean, I do because I gotta let the dogs out and stuff like that. So I know
Yeah,
Martin's a new father too. So
yeah, yeah. I mean, there's just so many things that
What is this thing called time for watching a movie?
yeah. Well, I'm
yeah,
back to the state where my kids are all grown and I can actually like, other than the dog, I don't have too much uh pulling at me at certain times.
but I mean, both of you bring up a good point. It's like part of focus is being kind to yourself and giving yourself time to build good habits and to actually like part of focus is time. And if you don't have time, if everything is vying for your attention, then yeah, it's going to feel hard to focus on anything.
Yeah.
So time boxing, I think, is a good technique. For folks who don't know what time boxing is, like, I mentioned calendars earlier. Set a calendar meeting for yourself so you can have some time, like uninterrupted time, to do the thing you need to do and to focus. So,
Yep.
I
have a little hourglass that I turn over, and it's 30. What is it? The
Pomodoro technique.
Yeah, Pomodoro.
What's it called? Yeah.
Pomodoro.
What century are you from, Chris?
I'm from last century, so I'm Gen X, so I remember when we didn't have computers in every room. But but yeah, I have an hour. Actually, two. One's 30 minutes, and one is 5 minutes.
Yeah.
And so mostly I have it just to look cool on my desk. But sometimes I'll use it, and I'll go, I'm going to work for 30 minutes so I can have a little break after that. And I've read that Pomodoro, actually, our brains are wired to work for highly concentrated focus for 30 minutes, then give yourself 5 and then go back to 30 minutes. And it does seem to work. So I like that also.
That's what the Italian tomato lobby wants you to think. I think that's what it is.
Yeah, the plastic tomato.
Yeah. I do have a sundial in my yard, though, so I think I have you beat in terms of ancient timekeeping mechanisms.
So that's the other thing.
Speaking.
So one. Oh, go ahead, Martin. I'll bring it up in a sec. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, giving yourself the time to work on things and so on is important. And I've always thought those people scheduling time in their agenda for certain tasks are crazy. But I've started doing this as an experiment somewhere last year. And I actually found it quite useful to be able to say, look, this afternoon, for example, is completely blocked out to work on that thing.
Mm-hmm.
And combined with that getting things done methods of finding those things that you should work on or must work on, if you give yourself 1 or 2 or 3 blocks a week, then you will find the energy level, but also the time to work on certain things.
Exactly. So I always, when I was leading a team, I always blocked off from like 2:30 to 4:30 on Friday afternoons for everyone's calendar. I set up a meeting, and it was so that people had time to wrap up their week and wrap up things that they had to get done, because people in the company was notorious for springing last minute meetings and having meetings at like 4 o'clock on Friday afternoon to wrap up this one item. It's like, nope, my team, after 2 or 2:30, we have no meetings, and we're wrapping up everything that needs to be wrapped up and getting ready for next week. And I think that's also good, because that is honesty about, I need some focus to wrap up what I'm doing and to look ahead next week.
Well, speaking of wrap up, I think we're coming up on time here. So
we are.
Let's each go through our key takeaways here, right? Martin, go ahead. Like, what do you think? What do you think about focus?
I think time is the most important thing, and I will say, to end this on a deeply philosophical note, I think time is probably the most, the thing as humans we are very liberal with, but that is also the one finite resource that we have. So if you want to focus, that is where things start.
Yep.
All right. Chris.
Your brain is a muscle, and you have to build it to be able to focus. So learn and figure out how you can build this muscle to focus better.
Yeah. And I guess my takeaway is, like, in the same vein as Chris saying exercise your habits and your brain muscles, it's like find what works for you in terms of focus. We talked about a lot of techniques, but I don't think there's like a silver bullet. Find what works for you and your brain, and I think that's probably the most important thing. So,
And
all right.
take care of yourself. Care for yourself. I hope everyone in 2024 finds time to take care of themselves, and because, like Martin said, like, we only have so much time, and I want everyone to be around for as much time.
Yeah. All right. On that note, all right. I think this is another episode in the can.
It is. It is. Bye-bye.
Bye, everybody.
Bye, everyone. See ya.